Trump administration ending this week with another legal setback. And developing news late today, a legal kind of humiliation for Trump's DOJ because they have dropped their much-hyped case against the former Olympian David Hearn, who was charged in connection with this damage to the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool, an issue that Donald Trump chose and that has bedeviled him over the last several weeks. The DOJ has a new filing that states it's become aware of information showing that the damage was the result of a botched installation and not vandalism as initially represented by the administration. I want to repeat, a botched installation and not vandalism, which is what the administration had claimed. Think about how bad it got and how baseless the claims were that the DOJ has to now cough up and admit this. Trump administration has spent millions trying to shift the color to Donald Trump's demands. And yet, as you may have heard, it remains an algae-infested greenish kind of pool. And then Trump tried to blame vandals, not just with rhetoric or words, which the president, like any American, is allowed to say things, but by using the power of his office, the power to investigate, indict, and jail, which apparently looks now more and more like cover and distraction from what was either ineffective or shoddy work performed by the hand-picked contractors of the Trump administration. This is not the biggest legal issue in the world, and we will cover more than one legal issue with our next guest, Ankush Khardori, but it is certainly a sign of the times. Mr. Khardori is a former federal prosecutor. He writes Open File and just wrote for the New York Times, quote, "There are so many reasons to reject Todd Blanche. Here's another one." And we will get to that as well. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
You are obviously very well suited to explain how many things have to go wrong for the DOJ to bring a case like this and then retract it. The floor is yours.
Ari, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, humiliating doesn't even begin to describe it. The piece today was about, the sort of seemingly endless bungling at the Justice Department, in addition to all of the things that I'm guessing you and I both object to, the abuses of authority, the improper objectives that they're pursuing. And it is very rare, I have to say, for someone to write a piece and then the same day get more evidence for the thesis. I mean, this is, I can't even begin to tell you how many things must have gone wrong. The investigation had to go wrong. I don't know who presented this case to get it charged. They should be asking themselves questions. And then it had to have been really bad. It had to have been really bad. There had to have been very strong contradictory evidence. There had to have been no chance that they were going to get this case over the finish line, because otherwise they pursue plenty of pointless legal fights if they can. And so, it's bad.
This is what our news viewers are informed. They know what a Friday night news dump looks like. They're trying to get this done on Friday, presumably because if they held the case, it would have been worse. And what? They would have been embarrassed in open court, admonished by a judge?
Yes. I'm guessing that is exactly what happened. Maybe they turned over some Brady information to the defense, discovered some Brady information that they should have already had but didn't have. And yes, at some point, this is clearly was so bad that they knew that it would get exposed at some point during the course of the proceeding. And potentially even some of them may have had to deal with professional repercussions. I mean, this is, I agree with you. It's a small thing, but it's also emblematic of what is wrong with this department and this administration. They tried to send this guy to, potentially to serve some time in custody or a fine or whatever for something that the administration itself screwed up. I mean, it's very disturbing.
Yeah, it's a small thing. It's a green thing, much to the president's concern. But it relates to the wider corruption, not, I think, too strong a word, under Todd Blanche.
Reflecting pool is this scummy, dirty reflecting pool is a reflection of a dirty, corrupted administration.
It's very much poetic.
If it wasn't for the fact that this is the sad thing taxpayers should see is you should be sitting there saying, wait a minute, the Department of Justice, the highest law enforcement organization in the country, has spent millions of dollars trying to prosecute one of our American Olympians when they're not using those resources to protect my family, to do drug cartels, to deal with international sex trafficking and more. So there's something poetic about it, but there's something pathetic about it too.
Simone, the thing that is stuck in my mind, has been from the very beginning, was that think about what they were willing to do to an everyday American citizen,
an Olympian, as the senator just said,
to placate Donald Trump, just to try to make something true that he was out spouting, that someone went out there with a razor blade and cut up a 350-foot thing with none of us saw. They were willing to take someone and put them in prison for that. And I think that's something that people have to think about.
Yeah, it really concerns me. I'm very concerned about this, and I think the people who watch the show are like, this girl's concerned every single night. Long list.
Concerned, folks.
But I'm concerned about this because, you know, Senator, we often talk about, and I mean, you talk about the corruption via what I would call the commercialization of the presidency.
Right.
But what this administration, this Department of Justice, has also tried to do is to criminalize everyday life and everyday politics. They're trying to criminalize journalism. If you ask a question they don't like or you write a story they don't like, you're the enemy of the people. We're going to sue you. If you're down at the reflecting pool criticizing the president, all of a sudden criticism is now criminal, apparently, in Donald Trump's America. I am concerned about the lengths that Eugene just laid out. This administration has been willing to go in order not just placate the president, but to keep up their version of events. If they will do this on this, what other things? How far are they willing to go on things like the election?
You hit it on its nose. If this dear leader who's acting like Kim Jong-il, where everybody sits around and tells him how great they are, anything he says is fact, a 3,500-foot slip that somebody did there. When you have a Justice Department that works for the president and not the people, that chooses Trump over truth, chooses corruption over the Constitution, we are all in bad shape. Because then when it becomes the serious things we want that Justice Department to be doing, protecting our elections, stopping cyber criminals, and all of those important things, they are actually answering to a president who has all kind of schemes, like the election wasn't fairly decided, all kind of schemes, like the biggest threats to America right now are still Hillary Clinton, are still Joe Biden. I'm going to still persecute those folks from the past, or Comey. We are in a dangerous situation. And what makes this possible is not that we have a dear leader want to be authoritarian. It's all the people that are enabling him, from Congress to the people in the cabinet.
Well, I still think they're all cray-cray. I think at the end of the day, that's how bad it is, because anyone who gives themselves over, particularly when you think about the lawyers who work in the Justice Department, the men and women who were there long before Donald Trump's behind his person showed up. Then
he only had this
himself.
nice kind of gravitas because you're at the table.
Correct. Because you're here, and I got Kyle in my ear. The reality of it is, if you are willing to give yourself over, if you're willing to risk your career because of what this man wants you to lie about in front of a federal judge, and bring these cases against individuals who were doing their work as a public servant. We've seen them come after members of your body. We've seen them come after state officials. We've seen them come after
members of the Fed.
Members, exactly. It's just everyday folks. Here's where I have the problem. And this is why I'm still on the fence about whether or not Republicans, like at the movie title says, do the right thing. I don't think they're going to do it. You've got Tom Tillis, who put out a statement on Blanche's nomination today via X. Let's take a look, people. This is what he said. It's a shame his confirmation has hit a snag only because an incompetent personal advisor to the president refuses to amend the bogus settlement. Okay, folks, can I unpack that for everybody real quick?
Please.
Real quick.
Lay it plain.
The only person advising Donald Trump is an incompetent personal advisor to the president who happens to be Donald Trump. Yeah, because he's the only person he listens to.
Yeah, like who is he? I mean, do the senators know that there's some? Is there another person advising the president we don't know about?
Senator Tillis, please name this individual, because we'd like to know who this person is who is advising the president to do what the president's doing, except for the president. So, I mean, this is the part that makes it so hard to believe how this thing advances beyond where it is. in that, this thing goes away and everybody stops and the president doesn't get his way. He's going to get his way here because you have the soft peddling like this. It's a shame his confirmations hit a snag. Well, it's hit a snag because you're holding it up.
For good reason, I would argue.
For a good reason.
Well, let's zone in on the standoff. The standoff is because Tillis and Cornyn, and they're saying there are other senators, there might be other moderates on the floor, are saying, wait a minute, the president should not have immunity on his taxes. Just rote immunity. No other American has that. Why is the president, through this settlement, get a slush fund, but even more priceless to him is immunity on all potential tax cheating on the billions he's making in office. So the president could simply say, you're right, put it in writing. But he is refusing to do that. This could have been done, what Tillis and Cornyn are asking for last week, but the president does not want to give up the grift and the graft.
For you.
Okay,
and you can react to this. I think it seems a little fishy to me. This is from our Lisa Rubin. In a filing tonight to the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, the Trump Justice Department insists that Trump's slush fund is dead, and they do so mostly by citing Todd Blanche's testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee earlier this month. Please show
You were
some
there,
respect.
sir.
I'm going to read a quote from
Zoom in on it.
Subsequent events underscore even further that the fund will not move forward and reaffirm this court's mootness analysis at the preliminary relief stage. On July 15, 2026, Acting Attorney General Blanche testified under oath at his Senate confirmation hearing that the fund is, quote, a moot issue, meaning there is no weaponization fund. The weaponization fund is dead. It's not moving forward, end quote. When pressed further, he emphasized the settlement fund is just not moving forward. There is no modification. It never started. No money went from the Treasury to any account. There are no commissioners. It's not moving.
1 second, Senator, because I do think it's important to hear what President Trump said earlier today at Camp David when talking about the J6s, which is about the slush fund. Let's play that, please.
There's a group of people in this country, history will show, that were treated like nobody else has ever been treated. They went down for an innocent journey. People that were very successful that wanted to go to a rally or an event and ended up spending the rest of their lives in horror. And I'd like to see them compensated for the pain.
Now, you have what the DOJ just said, and you also have the president saying today, I'd like to see them compensated for the pain. I wonder why you Democrats would want it written down somewhere.
So I want to remind your viewers of a few things. He was impeached for inciting a riot where people beat police officers nearly to death. Brian Sicknick from my state died a couple days after that. 7 Republicans voted to convict him on that impeachment. So there are a whole lot of folks on both sides of the aisle that saw that as not a jaunt in the park or an exercise of their freedoms. That's ridiculous what our president says. He should be checked on that. Number 2, I don't care what they may be trying to pull on the American public. Why won't they give Tillis and Cornyn in writing that not just that the slush fund's dead, but the president of the United States, who is making billions of dollars, whose children are making billions of dollars, who are grifting off of that office in every imaginable way. We don't even know the whole of it. This is why we need to get back control of the House and Senate and Democrats so we can run some hearings and investigations. We cannot let him wiggle his way into keeping a door open to give him what he really wants, which is immunity from his tax cheating. Because for him, this guy who has an avarice I have never seen before in an elected official, and that's saying a lot, he wants to preserve his ill-gotten gains while he's in office.
Do you remember, dear viewer, the saga of the reflecting pool? Of course you do. How Trump's American flag blue swimming pool liner started falling apart days after it was installed, awarded a no bid contract, and then the whole thing turned green. And then how Trump, in the most embarrassing performance of his second term, which is a crowded field, tried to blame it on vandals and saboteurs.
We have I think 290, 300-foot slit right through it, probably a box cutter or a knife of some kind. They cut it up with a box knife and tried to destroy it. And it's in great shape now. They're terrible. They're vandals. They took a cutter, a box cutter or something very sharp. And can you imagine, where did these people come up with this? And they cut, and then they started ripping it up. You know why? Because they're sick people.
Now, as obvious as it was that it wasn't vandals who screwed up the reflecting pool, we all knew that. Trump's people began arresting tourists and people like former Olympic athlete David Hearn for touching the water in the pool and accusing them of cutting or otherwise damaging the ill-planned rubberized pool coating that was peeling for all to see. In fact, we interviewed Mr. David Hearn and his lawyer here on this program less than 2 weeks before Trump's hand-picked U.S. Attorney for D.C., Jeanine Pirro, announced a federal felony charge against him.
The evidence shows, and we will prove beyond a reasonable doubt, that Hearn willfully destroyed property at the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool.
Let me just repeat that in case you missed it. The evidence shows, and we will prove beyond a reasonable doubt, that Hearn willfully destroyed property at the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. Well, tonight, prosecutors filed a motion to dismiss that indictment against Hearn, just 1 week before they were set to face the judge overseeing the case in a hearing. In tonight's truly shocking, amazing 20-page filing, prosecutors in Jeanine Pirro's office say the government received new evidence indicating that, and we quote here, damage to the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool in June 2026 was the result of flawed installation by the contractor. Quote, a rushed and botched installation by AIC, the primary contractor, led to the damage of the lining of the reflecting pool. Harry Litman is a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Department of Justice, a former U.S. Attorney. He's host of the Talking Feds podcast, author of the Talking Feds Substack, and he joins me now. Well, Harry, in a lawyer's career, there are L's and then there are L's. And I gotta say, as big an L, I mean, can you imagine ever? I mean, you ran a U.S. Attorney's office. You were in Maine Justice. I mean, is this as bad and embarrassing a screw up as you've ever seen?
You know, you've said, Chris, it's a very high bar, but I think it is exactly that. It's not simply that they stumbled in, but this was the most perfectly, you could say, Kafka-esque prosecution ever. This guy was just a made-to-order talking point. He had no connection with Trump at all, wasn't a political enemy or anything, and he was served up for that reason. And Pirro, you mentioned I was a U.S. attorney. You're not allowed. She had already acted improperly by saying the things she said, even had they been true, just the things outside the indictment which were prejudicial. They now look to have been patently false. And what the hell? The Department of Interior, they've now learned this from? How do you possibly bring these charges without maybe calling the federal agency that has responsibility here and saying, do you have any evidence? This was the sort of nadir, I really do think, of the whole department under Trump. It's saying a lot, but it was abjectly corrupt because this guy was just served up to further a Trump talking point that was a lie from the start.
I mean, you know, we're laughing now. They were going to try to put this guy in jail for 10 years, in prison for 10 years. Okay. It's like that was what they were going for, just so to remind everyone. And you just mentioned the Department of Interior. One of the things that is so insane about this filing is they do this 180 and then Pirro just goes so hard at the Department of Interior like she got screwed and lied to by them. Here, I'll quote. DOI, Department of Interior, provided less than fulsome information at the outset of this case. Had DOI been forthcoming with the information clearly in its possession, the government would not have sought a grand jury indictment. But again, you don't get off the hook. You brought the charges.
100%. They said, and she said, we can prove these beyond a reasonable doubt. And she said, we have witnesses who saw her and pull the whole thing up and, go down there and totally damage it. And there's more to it. You know, a total debacle, true. But worse than that, a total injustice. And I think they had to now, they were forced because Hearn had filed a motion that made it clear this $1,000 worth of damage, they just put it in in order to make this a felony. But they had no evidence before the grand jury. How the hell did they get the grand jury, who grand jurors had asked about this, to vote these charges? That's an ugly thing they get to now avoid big time. Her statements and her improper conduct. So really, yes, a circus, kind of funny, but not so funny for David Hearn, as you point out, looking at 10 years in jail, and just so perfectly Kafkaesque, I gotta say. This is a guy who was just thrown into a nightmare out of the blue for no reason. 56-year-old guy, Olympian, no reason to think he's got the big money to be able to defend himself. This was abject, nasty, complete exploitation of an innocent man.
Yeah, and shout out to Norm Eisen, you see there, who was on the program with him, who was his lawyer, and did some good lawyering here.
Yes, he did.
There was also, this is a little like, it's similar, I think, to Comey case, where there really is, you said Kafka, there really is something totalitarian about being told a lie from the leader that everyone knows is a lie. We all know it's a lie. We know that no one went in there with a box cutter and ripped it up. We know it was poorly installed and the whole thing was, and then forcing everyone to go and repeat the lie to all of us to the point of prosecution. Here is Doug Burgum on a Sunday morning show. Watch him do this. Watch the totalitarian repetition of the lie in front of everyone. Take a listen.
And you're 100% sure that what happened with the liner was vandalism. You can prove it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely can. And as we drain it, and we've got all the photographs we can see. I mean, there's no possible way.
With photographs of a person or people cutting a 300 or 350 foot gash in the bottom of the reflecting pool?
Dana, I'm not sure why you and others in the media think that you want to keep trying to question.
Well, the reason that we want to keep asking, Doug, is because we think you're lying, which has now been proven in a federal court filing in court, Harry.
Exactly. And look, it's one thing, Chris, that they lie to all the American people. They do this again and again. But I'm sorry, the most serious governmental power is the power to deprive somebody of liberty. And just to further this, to make it look a little better, here's a guy. Here you go. And we've got the evidence, and you're in big trouble. It is really nauseating.
Harry Litman, who I always enjoy talking to. We'll have you back next time, because we didn't even get to the slush fund, which, by the way, is not dead and will be alive next week. I'm fairly certain, because I want to talk about that. Harry Litman.
I think that's
great to see you. Thanks,
Chris.
I get to start the show tonight with a sentence I never thought I would really get to utter. The Trump administration just admitted that the president wasn't telling the truth. Earlier tonight, Trump's Justice Department dropped their criminal case against David Hearn, the former Olympian who they charged with vandalizing the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool here in Washington, D.C. Now, folks, you may remember how Trump made a big deal of claiming that the reflecting pool had been damaged by mysterious vandals who, he said, cut a 350-foot gash in the pool's new liner. U.S. Attorney and former Fox News host Jeanine Pirro made an absolute spectacle of bringing criminal charges against a man who she said did nothing other than touch the pool's lining that had already been torn.
There was an effort, a violent effort, to rip up the sealant from the bottom of the pool. He damaged the pool. He damaged this pool.
Well, he apparently did not damage the pool, because nobody did. No one. The reason that the reflecting pool's new liner started coming apart at the seams is exactly what we all suspected. Donald Trump's hand-picked contractors did a really, really bad, lousy job. In their filing, dropping the case, the Justice Department admitted that documents provided by the Interior Department indicate, quote, the damage to the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool was the result of flawed installation by the contractor. It is a stunning admission of defeat from Donald Trump. Because remember, Trump spent months micromanaging this project, folks. He bragged about how his pool guy had come up with the idea for the pool's new liner, how he had personally chosen the color, And he went around the normal process for government projects and contracts and handed out a no-bid contract to a company that apparently just screwed the whole thing up.
With just 1 week until senators are set to leave Washington, D.C. for their annual August recess, the confirmation of Donald Trump's former personal lawyer as Attorney General remains on hold due to a crisis of his own making. Republican Senators Thom Tillis of North Carolina and John Cornyn of Texas are blocking Todd Blanche's nomination from passing through the Judiciary Committee until they get in writing from Donald Trump that his $1.776 billion anti-weaponization fund is officially dead. It's pretty clear that Donald Trump doesn't want to give up the settlement or the IRS immunity for him and his family that comes with it. This morning, Donald Trump fired off this lengthy social media post calling out Senator Cornyn for stalling Blanche's nomination. Seemingly in defense of his fellow Republican, Senator Tillis responded with his own post. Quote, "The president made it clear today that the so-called anti-weaponization fund is still alive, which is exactly why we are attempting to formally end it. Senator Cornyn and I have been working with acting AG Todd Blanche to end the anti-weaponization fund, and he has been forthright, thoughtful, and patient. It's a shame his confirmation has hit a snag, only because an incompetent personal advisor to the president refuses to amend the bogus settlement. I will continue working in good faith to put an end to this legal political albatross and prevent any potential misallocation of taxpayer dollars." Well, less than an hour later, Donald Trump, he said this.
This is being done by a senator, and I don't really blame him, to be honest with you. I endorsed his opponent, and as soon as I endorsed his opponent went through the roof, and he won the primary election in Texas.
Do you agree, just to be clear, do you agree with the acting attorney general that the anti-weaponization fund is dead? And why not just put that in writing?
It is dead, but, I wish it weren't, to be honest with you.
Except it appears to not be dead because Cornyn and Tillis still haven't said that that agreement has been made. So that was followed by news tonight that Donald Trump is appealing a federal judge's order finding he filed a bad faith $10 billion lawsuit in order to reach this very settlement that resulted in the anti-weaponization fund. CNBC reports Trump, two of his adult sons, and the Trump Organization, along with two of their attorneys, said in a joint filing Friday afternoon that they are appealing Judge Kathleen Williams' scathing order to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. Williams had ruled July 13th that the lawsuit, ostensibly stemming from the leak of Trump's tax returns by an ex-IRS employee years earlier, was in fact brought to provide judicial legitimacy for a settlement that had no viable basis in law or fact. After Friday's appeal notice was filed, a spokesman for Trump's legal team repeated a prior statement slamming the IRS leak and declaring President Trump continues to hold those who wrong America and Americans accountable. Also tonight, MS Now, it's confirmed that the Justice Department moved to drop felony charges against former Olympian David Hearn after acknowledging that the damage to the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool was caused by a flawed installation rather than vandalism. The motion to dismiss was filed by D.C. Attorney Jeanine Pirro after prosecutors concluded that the damage attributed to Hearn stemmed from defects in the installation of the reflecting pool's liner. The filing said information obtained after the indictment showed the damage was caused by, quote, botched work performed by the project's contractor, not by criminal conduct. Remember, it was Donald Trump's chosen contractor who did this very work, and it was Trump himself who made this following claim.
They cut it up with a box knife and tried to destroy it. These people are sick. They ripped a scar 350 feet long through the side of the reflecting pool.
And Jeanine Pirro said they had beyond a reasonable doubt that Hearn had in fact ripped it up. Joining us now is Barbara McQuade, former U.S. attorney and law professor at the University of Michigan Law School. She is also an MS Now legal analyst. She is the author of The Fix, Saving America from the Corruption of a Mob-Style Government. Barbara, first, I want to start with the reflecting pool because I think it sets up everything else around this. Clearly false statements made by the president and Jeanine Pirro that his own people then aren't able to prove in the court of law. What damage does filing these types of prosecutions, from trying to make the Subway sandwich thrower a felony crime to the reflecting pool indictment, do to the credibility of the Department of Justice?
Boy, Vaughn, I really worry what it does, because it means that members of the public can no longer trust the Justice Department to be bringing cases in good faith. The timing of this dismissal is so suspect. It came right after the defense filed a motion to disclose grand jury materials because of this very issue. A witness came into the grand jury room, according to the transcript, testified he didn't know anything about the value of the damage that had been done by Mr. Hearn. He leaves the room and 20 minutes later comes back and says, oh yeah, it was more than $1,000, which is what the statute requires. It was so implausible that the defense team filed a motion to find out everything that occurred before the grand jury. And then the very next day, we see this motion to dismiss. This confirms what most people have suspected all along, that there was no there. But it appears that this case had come to roost, that they were about to be discovered, that there really was no basis for this case. And so rather than be humiliated, Jeanine Pirro chose to voluntarily dismiss the case. But it really harms not just these prosecutions, but the other hundreds and thousands of cases that are brought every day that are legitimate, cases of bank robbery or human trafficking. And jurors are now going to rightfully be suspicious when the Justice Department or the FBI tells them anything.
We're watching a correction, of course, Barbara, it seems like in real time after some of these claims are made. And I just think for everybody watching, this is the motion to dismiss. And the end of it says, quote, finally, a recent visual inspection showed damage throughout the reflecting pool, even in the middle of the pool, where a vandal would not likely have attempted to peel the lining. Given all of this newly discovered information, it is difficult to attribute the widespread damage to the reflecting pool to vandalism, let alone to establish that fact beyond a reasonable doubt. I read that because it is signed, respectfully submitted, Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. Attorney herself. But on that line of, right, sort of the course correction being made from previous decisions by this Department of Justice, one of them is around the anti-weaponization fund. And, well, the president today claimed that it's dead. Senator Tillis is saying otherwise. My question for you, Barbara, is how can the Department of Justice actually roll back the fund and essentially reverse course on that $1.76 billion and make this formal that it is, in fact, not going anywhere?
Well, you know, as we've heard, Vaughn, Todd Blanche has said in confirmation hearings now twice that it's dead. They're not moving forward on it. That statement alone, Judge Kathleen Williams says, demonstrates that this was not an arm's length negotiation, because if it were, one party to the case, like Todd Blanche, can't just unilaterally say the thing's dead. It requires both parties to say that. And we have Donald Trump saying just the opposite. And so I think it is very understandable that people want to see in writing the idea that this case is withdrawn, because otherwise it still stands. It's a written document. There is a settlement. And, you know, settlement agreements are contracts between the Justice Department and Donald Trump as an individual in this case. And so representations orally by Todd Blanche really aren't very meaningful. And so I think what you would need is to see both parties file some agreement that says they have withdrawn this agreement and that this deal is no longer going forward. But when President Trump himself continues to say that he thinks it is a valid weaponization fund, when he says they're going to appeal the decision by Judge Williams, finding that this was not an arm's length agreement and there was no adversity to the parties and it was just a sham on the court. I think that people are, Senator Tillis and Senator Cornyn are well advised to demand this to be in writing. Otherwise, it's not valid.
Elise Labott and Jeff Mason are back with us. Y'all, from the very beginning, it was very clear that David Hearn had not done this. It made no sense whatsoever. And then there was no proof that there was a 350-foot cut in the reflecting pool. Also, how would he do this with no one on earth seeing him? I will say, while it's very silly, at the end of the day, Jeff, it's also concerning the lengths that this administration was willing to go, blaming not even because people are like, oh, an Olympian, no, blaming an American citizen for something they did not do, charging them with a crime, saying they should go to jail, trying to put them in jail, all based on Trump's vibes and his feelings, and trying to make sure that he did not, the person who did this doesn't get in trouble for botching it.
So I was excited to talk about this story because you all know me well enough to know I like facts.
Yes.
Right? The facts in this are so clear, and it was the Department of Justice that now has had to concede those facts and embarrassingly withdraw this suit. It's just, I think it's more than an embarrassment in a way for the administration. It is emblematic, because there are so many instances where someone, including the president or his people, will say, hey, look here, or let's blame this, or let's say this is what it is, when the facts absolutely do not support that. And that is exactly what happened here. I think the broader political question is, does that lead to anyone within his base or within his, be it lawmakers or be it just regular voters, to say, wait, I can't always believe everything that he says. And I think, again, if past is prologue, that probably will not be the case. But it is exhibit A of what happens on both a sort of smaller level like this to also bigger policy.
They went on such a limb, though. I mean, Jeanine Pirro, the Attorney General for D.C. or the district, was like, in that press conference, he did it. There's evidence. I'll show you. And I mean, if she had to run for anything again, would be.
We actually have that. We actually have that sound at least. Let's play Jeanine Pirro saying what Elise just said, but in her own words.
The evidence shows, and we will prove beyond a reasonable doubt, that Hearn willfully destroyed property at the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. We can state and prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he caused damage, and that damage is over $1,000.
I'm sorry, that was a little too exuberant on my part, the laughter. But
I don't think it was. I think it was right on the mark.
Okay, I'll go guffaw next time. But Elise, pick up on what Jeff was talking about, because as you were talking about, this is an embarrassment for the administration. It's also an embarrassment for the Justice Department. And a friend of the show, Ankush Kadori, had an opinion piece in the New York Times yesterday talking about Todd Blanche's nomination. But also the bigger issue here is all of the things that the DOJ has done, the cases they have brought, that they have had to withdraw. Case in point, the subpoenas for the New York Times reporters, and how all of Comey, he goes through a whole list. And in listening to Jeff and remembering Ankush's piece, the deterioration of the legitimacy of the Department of Justice. That, to me, is what this story is, even though I've been giggling throughout it because it was so absurd from the beginning. We've been laughing about it. But it's just one more piece of evidence that this Justice Department is no longer separate from the executive, that it is clearly
What do you mean by no longer? I mean, even under Pam Bondi, I mean, this was clearly a Justice Department that was from previous administration. Yes. I think that this has been a Justice Department that is not independent of the White House. And I mean, look, it's not just the Justice Department. We see what's happening in Congress with the Blanche issue. The White House feels that any independent agency, any branch of government should be subservient to the president and to do what they want. And I think,
executive theory.
Look, and on the Justice Department, they're just throwing all these things like spaghetti against the wall, see what sticks. If it doesn't stick, they just move on. And I think the American people, there's this general perception, but they're not harping on everyone. I mean, the media harps on everyone, but it's just this general perception of fatigue. Right. And I think now even the Republican Party is saying, enough.
You're right to single out DOJ in particular, I think, in this instance, because President Trump, we know, during the first term was frustrated with his attorneys general then, saying, where's my Roy Cohn, right? Yeah. Well, he found him in the now an acting attorney general, but also in Pam Bondi for his second term. He absolutely, as Elise was saying, does see the DOJ as an extension of the White House. And that, and you reflected this in your question, is absolutely a departure from previous administrations and what the DOJ was seen as. And that is reflected in this. And I would add just one other example when we're talking about facts. I'm glad that you mentioned the New York Times reporters. Well, I think that was for the story about Air Force One, right?
Yes.
Which is another example of the administration, in this case, the president specifically, specifically saying, oh, we're not going to fly Air Force One right now to the UK, or I'm not going to fly on it because we're going to let some Air Force or military people tour it.
Look at it.
When the whole time it was actually related to a security issue. And that reporting, again, going back to facts, there's reporting that showed that, and now they've had to essentially concede it.
Jackie, you're at the White House all the time. What's going on?
Because you mentioned the facts, I do think that this 19-page motion to dismiss is worth reading, because like so many things that this administration engages in, it often ends up the end result being extremely counterproductive to what they ultimately, what the initial goal was. And this motion to dismiss very clearly outlines sentence by sentence what a disaster this no-bid contract was. On page 18, the rush to complete the project led to hasty and botched work that was not remediated before the project was finished and the fencing removed. Each sentence throws Trump's own DOJ throwing his Department of Interior under the bus and showing what a horrible job this ultimately resulted in. And I think it is reflective. And I think, we obviously have talked a lot about his vanity projects, but it's reflective of the broader themes of this administration, because these patterns are also what happens when we are discussing the broader policy objectives that they're engaging in.
So my question is,
real fast, because we got to go.
Does President kind of take this and say, oh, this was bad? Or do these officials just do whatever he wants to make him happy, and they don't care how their department looks if it doesn't work out?
That one. That's what it seems like it is.
Well, we have to have you back to answer that question. But I do think at the end of the day, that first headline that Jeanine Pirro saying this man is guilty, we will find the evidence. That is really all that matters to the president. But Elise Lavit and Jeff Mason are sticking with us.
So let's start with MS Now White House reporter Akayla Gardner. Akayla, welcome to you on this Saturday. How is the president reacting to the Senate putting contingencies on Todd Blanche's nomination?
Alex, President Trump says he is willing to play the long game. He's willing to keep Todd Blanche in his acting capacity at the Justice Department until John Cornyn and Thom Tillis retire next year. Now, those two men are important because they sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee. They're right now holding up his nomination in that committee. But that just comes after President Trump says that he wants that anti-weaponization bill to be codified into law. Now, this is what he said just yesterday.
Do you agree with the acting attorney general that the anti-weaponization fund is dead? And why not just put that in writing?
It is dead, but, I wish it weren't, to be honest with you. I think people were horribly treated, horribly abused. This has nothing to do with Todd. This was me. Horribly abused. And I'd like to see them compensated for the pain.
Now, for Senator Thom Tillis and John Cornyn, this just proves the point that they had a reason to be concerned about this fund, and they had asked Todd Blanche to put in writing that this fund would be killed, and he refused to do that. And Tillis says today that the president could talk about this bill, but there's simply not a majority of Republicans in order to pass it. Donald Trump would also need Democrats to pass this bill, and notably, both men say that they would support Todd Blanche. They're just looking for those certain contingencies.
Another question on what just happened moments ago, Akayla, because the president lashed out at the Justice Department for dropping that reflecting pool vandalism case. It was against a former Olympian. What can you tell us?
Alex, I know this is shocking for everyone, but the D.C. Attorney General says that damage caused to the reflecting pool was caused by a botched job by that no-bid contractors. And she says it was not attributed to vandalism, even though President Trump made that claim continuously. And this comes after Jeanine Pirro had said that there was tremendous evidence to charge that former Olympian, David Hearn, in this case. And she says that the Interior Department actually misled her office, saying that they had evidence that he was responsible for that. And President Trump is taking aim at her. This is his hand-picked D.C. Attorney General, and he says, I don't know what she was thinking. He does acknowledge that there was some difficulty by the contractors, but he says major damage continues. He continues to say that major damage was caused by vandals.